I have to say I'm anxious right now. And whenever I have somebody coming to me who's anxious, I always give just one advice. Get your best friend with you. In case you don't know what this best friend is, then... So this is what I believe in, that is bringing ourselves pleasure. Now, I don't know what you think about pleasure, but let me tell you this. There are 3 times more people on this planet who suffer from diabetes than people who suffer from sexual frustration. Yet had I pulled out of my pocket a bar of chocolate and peanuts, everybody would have been excited. The number 1 cause for human misery is the amount of shame and guilt that we place on our sexuality and the transgenerational stigma that is placed on sexuality. There is a market, a huge market out there of pornography and prostitution that is left to thrive and to grow, yet we are told that we shouldn't do it, we should hide it, we should not own this. 9 out of 10 marriages are sexually numb, and in those marriages, children are raised sexually frustrated or perhaps sexually ignorant, soon to be adults, walking in the world, mating with other adults, sexually ignorant or sexually frustrated. And all this because we ignore or we are reluctant to look at a very base instinct of ours, which is our sexuality. Ladies and gentlemen, whenever I speak in front of groups of people, I always bring these facts up, though I just made them all up, just to get the conversation started about sexuality. So are you ready to talk about sex with me now? Okay, I have 3 questions for you, and these are the questions that I usually ask the people that I work with. Number 1, what is your intention in your erotic intimacy? Okay, I'll try another way. What is your erotic self about? I swear, we have crickets in the audience this evening. I'll try another way. What is it that you embody and that you express in your sexual intimacy? As you can imagine, the answers that I'm looking for are not so easy to speak or sometimes even to conceive. But I believe if we care about the way we show up in intimacy, then these 3 questions are the place to start. I'm trained as a sexological body worker, and by this training, I hold space for people. I ask questions which are sometimes puzzling or challenging, or, well, if they hit a nerve, they are downright irritating. And by my training, I also bring the awareness to people of the physical sensations that they have in their body when they hear a question, the emotions that are stirred up, the memories that are triggered, and how all this affects the answers that they give or that they don't give. So let's start from the beginning. Number 1, the intention. Or, as Emily Witt puts it in her book, Future Sex, the declaration of pursuit. In many other areas of our life, whether it's a business or just our career or academic background or our sports habits or preferences, our hobbies, sometimes our health, though not enough here, the why we do the things we do is elementary. Everybody goes from that place. Yet, odd enough, when it comes to our erotic intimacy, asking yourself, why do I get into a relationship? Why do I have sex with somebody? Seems like, well, for some people silly, for others stupid. For others it's like, come on, don't you have anything better to do with your life? For others it's a sin. But I believe that if you look at the intention that you have for your intimacy, which is supposed to come from your core, your fundamental desire, why you do everything in your intimate life, the first benefit is that you make it possible for the person or the persons that you engage with to distinguish themselves from you. Here's what I mean. When you love something, when you adore it, when you want more and more of a touch, of a word, of an action, of a place, of a person, it makes it possible for the other person to not say, well, of course they'll love me and they'll adore me. Everybody does that. I'm that great. And vice versa. When you're indifferent, when you're turned off, when you're disgusted, when you reject something, when you want nothing to do with a touch, a person, a word, a place, an action, in intimacy, you make it possible to the other person to not take it personally. So to not go, well, they say they love me, but if they rejected this, that means they're not showing how they love me. Everything that you do is supposed to be in alignment with your core self. That's why your intention makes it simpler, and I didn't say easy, I just said simpler, to engage in your erotic life with people. The second question that I asked you was about your erotic self. Tell me more about your erotic self. Now, I use specifically these words, erotic self, because many people that I work with, when they hear these words, they almost instantaneously think of themselves in the act of sex. The erotic self and the act of sex are not one and the same. Absolutely not. The erotic self can contain the act of sex, but it can exist without it just as well. So I'm going to invite you now to remove from your thought yourself engaging in sex with somebody and ask yourself, what am I left with in terms of my erotic instinct, sexual instinct? Have you ever thought of that? I hear those crickets again. So here are 3 things for me. Number 1, your emotions. Before you go for food and for chocolate, before you go for technique and for accessories or for toys, before you go for crazy places, emotion is the biggest aphrodisiac. Our body responds with physical arousal, first and foremost to emotion. There are 2 catches with emotion, though. Number 1, no 2 people will respond with physical arousal to the same emotion. I know what you're thinking. The second catch, ourselves in our lifetime will not respond with physical arousal to the same emotion all the time. Some of us, or just us sometimes, we find exuberance and freedom arousing, or joy, or happiness, or ecstasy, or bliss, or closeness, and tenderness, and comfort, and safety. Boy, a lot of women find safety very arousing. Some of us find dirtiness and naughtiness arousing. Some of us find anger, hatred, and even revenge arousing. It is a vast and complex erotic world out there, and when you become aware, because this is all you can do with your emotions, become aware of which emotion triggers erotic arousal, physical arousal in you, you have more clarity in how you show up in intimacy and in what conditions. The second thing about the erotic self are the erotic expectations. Now, 2 things about expectations. Number 1, there are many people, and maybe some of you in this audience have said this at least once in your lifetime, I don't have expectation. I grew from that level. Well, not just in my life, but also in my practice, I find that that is the biggest lie we tell ourselves and to the people next to us. We all have expectations. For instance, everybody expects that when we engage in sexual intimacy with somebody, we experience a certain amount of pleasure and enjoyment. Everybody expects that when we have sex with somebody else, that person is at least attracted to us enough to have sex with us. everybody expects that through their lifetime, they'll meet at least one person who's crazy enough to not find them just enticing or arousing or exciting, but also worthy to become life partners with us. Some of us have expectation that more people are like this. Nobody ever grows out of expectations. And the second thing about expectations, erotic expectations, is that they are externally driven. We are social human beings, so we adapt ourselves to the people, to the places, to the times, to the collective values of where we live. And we do this in our erotic lives as well. And as such, we portray an erotic image in the world, whether we're conscious or not, whether it's more obvious or more subtle. And this image has the risk to be very far, if we're not careful enough, to be very far from what we are actually about in intimacy, what we can actually hold and manifest in intimacy, and what we actually need and desire. So whenever I work with somebody around erotic expectations, I ask them 3 things. Number 1, what are you really about in your erotic life? And see, this is the place where ego plays in. Because many people say, don't ask me that. I know what I'm about. I'm here to learn new things. Life has a very funny way of showing you through troublesome attractions, problematic relationships, or sometimes catastrophic sex acts that maybe sometimes you don't know what you're about. The second question that I ask them, are you ashamed of yourself? So if some people know a little more what they're about, they are ashamed, some people can feel this, ashamed of what they actually are and what they actually need. They don't own it to themselves. And the third question that I ask people, working with erotic expectations, are you afraid to show this, to at least hint it in society? Many of us are afraid. We're afraid that in the social group where we are, the person or the persons that we're attracted to might reject us. Or we're afraid that people might laugh at us and they might embarrass us. In the worst case, and this happens today, we are afraid that people, if they knew what we're about in our intimacy, will shun us, will exclude us from the group altogether. This does happen. And the third thing about your erotic self, because we are still here, are values. And I'm not going to go on you with morals and ethics, but this was the third question that I asked you. What is it that you embody and that you express in your erotic intimacy? Through every pore of our skin, through every gaze, through every breath, sound, word, action, touch, or pause, we communicate in a very alive way. The values, the erotic values that are imprinted in us, again, whether we're conscious or not. Some of us embody and express acceptance, patience, reverence, adoration, authenticity, purity, rawness, disrespect, arrogance, entitlement. Our lovers, one night stand or a lifetime, will feel through every pore of their skin in those moments, through every breath, what you're communicating. And this will determine their willingness to open up and show up authentically or withdraw. And if with emotions, you don't really have a say in them, you can just become aware of them. With expectations and values, you do have a choice and you do have a say in this. This is a self-revealing process, and you can also choose to transform whatever it is that you don't like or don't see beautiful benefits in. So I was curious with the people in my community, which is not that big yet, to see how they go about this self-revealing process. So for 1 year and 5 months, I had a survey, which was pretty long, 30+ questions, and I only had 410 answers. And of those answers, I'll only speak about a few, but you can, when you go back home, you can type in sexual development survey, put my name next to it, and you can read all the contents. So, 95% of the respondents said that they were often, and very often, thinking about growing in sexuality. 95%, that's a big number. 80% of the entire respondents said that they often, and very often, read books, articles, magazines, as a means of developing themselves in intimacy. 72% watched documentaries, often or very often. 70% spoke to their partners, often or very often. 30% often or very often went to classes, workshops, events around sexuality as a means of developing themselves in intimacy. And alas, 17% of the respondents went to a therapist, a counselor, a coach, a healer, a practitioner as a means of growing in sexuality. Being a coach myself, this last answer hurt, but I got over it. So what this survey showed me was that in this self-revealing and self-transformational process, the majority of us go in a very self-sufficient way. And if we ever choose a third party, we choose it indirectly. So books, interviews, magazines, documentaries. I would like just to mention here that perhaps sometimes, when you're in the most difficult period of your life, a third person, objective and trained and responsible, may help you show a lot of things from within you, blind spots that you were not aware of. And that can be of help. But regardless of which way you go about this, looking at your intention, so your declaration of pursuit, which sounds so grand, looking at your erotic self, and of the erotic self, the values that you embody and that you express, is going to bring you more personal clarity. And with more personal clarity, we are better at showing up in intimacy. And watch out for our pen pal this evening, because it's still here. So we all care about the quality of our intimate lives. We would not be in relationships, we would not try and try and try again, we would spend our lives as monks if we didn't. Going about this self-revealing process is not easy. No, it's not comfortable, but it can bring beautiful results and it can change the way we show up in intimacy. So I want you to take this thought with you back home tonight, sleep on it if you're at it, and then take the best decisions for your life. Thank you.